You have to see it to believe it. Those words from Jack kept echoing in my head as I gripped the steering wheel of my Tesla, parked in the shadows of a row of ancient oaks. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of this prestigious neighborhood, where each mansion told its own story of wealth and success. Stories that, until recently, I could only dream about. I checked my watch again, 5:47 p.m. Alice's silver Mercedes was still parked in front of the sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion across the street. The same spot where Jack had photographed it 3 times this week. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my phone to check the time again, even though I'd just looked at my watch. Old habits die hard, I suppose. The text from Jack flashed on my screen, 3rd floor, master bedroom. West wing. You can see everything from here. Had managed to get a maintenance job in the neighboring property, giving us a perfect vantage point. I didn't want to look, but I had to know. I had to see it with my own eyes. Through the massive windows of the mansion, I could see them. Alice, my wife of 12 years, was laughing at something Richard Morrison had just said. Yes, that Richard Morrison, the tech mogul whose face graced the covers of business magazines, the man who'd built a billion-dollar empire from a startup in his garage. He was holding her hand, pulling her close as they stood by the window, completely oblivious to the outside world. To me. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, when my software company was struggling and we were living paycheck to paycheck, Alice had walked out. "I can't live like this anymore, John," she'd said, packing her bags while I begged her to stay, to give me more time. "I need stability. I need a man who can provide for a family." A family. The word still felt like a knife in my gut. For years, she'd insisted we weren't ready for children. "We need to be financially stable first," she'd say. It wouldn't be fair to bring a child into uncertainty. Now I wondered if she'd already been planning her exit strategy. I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the smooth envelope containing the documents Jack had collected. Bank statements, hotel receipts, photographs, a paper trail of betrayal that stretched back further than I'd imagined. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. No, the real shock came from the medical records. Alice had a son. A 2-year-old boy named James. My hands clenched around the steering wheel as I watched them through the window. She was wearing the diamond necklace I'd given her on our 10th anniversary, probably the last expensive gift I could afford before everything fell apart. Before she left. The necklace caught the light as she turned, and for a moment, I could see her profile clearly. She was smiling that same smile that used to make my heart skip a beat. But I wasn't the same man she'd left behind. The past 3 years had changed everything. While she was building her new life with Morrison, I'd been rebuilding mine from the ashes. My software company had finally broken through, not with the project I'd been obsessing over when she left, but with something completely different. Something that came to me during those sleepless nights after she walked out. Now, as I sat in my $120,000 car, watching my wife with her billionaire lover, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, but it was different now. Colder. More focused. I pulled out my phone and dialed Jack's number. "You were right," I said quietly. I had to see it. "So, what's the play?" Jack's voice was steady, professional. He wasn't just my best friend anymore, had become my partner in what was about to unfold. I looked down at the invitation in my lap, cream-colored paper with gold embossing. The Paradise Valley Charity Gala, hosted by none other than Richard Morrison himself. The same gala where, in 2 weeks' time, Morrison planned to announce his engagement to Alice. Our divorce wasn't even final yet. "Remember that empty mansion on Sunrise Drive?" I asked. "The one that's been on the market for months. The Henderson place?" "Yeah, what about it?" "Call our real estate contact. I want to rent it for the next 3 months. I paused, watching as Morrison pulled Alice close for a kiss. "And Jack. Make sure the paperwork shows it's owned by Franklin Partners. Your holding company." I could hear the smile in Jack's voice. "She won't know it's you." "Exactly." I started the car, the electric motor humming to life silently. It's time to show Alice exactly what she walked away from. And Morrison, well, let's see how he likes playing games when he's not the one making the rules. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught one last glimpse of them in the window. Alice was laughing again, her head thrown back, Morrison's arms around her waist. She looked happy, confident, secure in her new life of luxury. She had no idea what was coming. Because while she'd been playing house with her billionaire, I'd been learning. Growing. The company she'd dismissed as a failure had become a silent giant in the tech world. The men she'd left behind had become someone else entirely. And now, with the pieces finally in place, I was ready to show her exactly who that man was. The sun was setting as I drove home, casting long shadows across the valley. In my mind, I could already see how it would play out. The gala. The announcement. The look on Alice's face when she realized just who her new neighbor was. And finally, the moment when everything she'd built with Morrison would come crashing down. I smiled as I merged onto the highway. After all, revenge, like success, is best served with perfect timing. And I had all the time in the world. The next morning, I sat in my home office, staring at the documents spread across my desk. Birth certificate, medical records, preschool registration forms, all the paper proof of a life Alice had hidden from me. James Richard Morrison, born 2 years after she left me. The timing made my stomach turn. My phone buzzed with a text from Jack, rental agreement signed. Keys tomorrow. You sure about this? Was I sure? I looked at the photo of James I'd obtained, a toddler with Alice's blue eyes and Morrison's dark hair. The boy who could have been mine, in another life. The family Alice had claimed she never wanted. Yes, I typed back. Start the preparations. And Jack. Make sure the guest list for our little charity event includes all the right people. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing with possibilities. Alice had always been obsessed with status, with appearances. It was why she'd left me when things got tough, why she'd latched onto Morrison. Now I would use that same obsession against her. The plan was simple but meticulous. Rent the mansion next door. Throw an exclusive charity event that would attract Paradise Valley's elite. Make sure Alice and Morrison attended, thinking it was just another social obligation. And then. My phone rang, my corporate lawyer, Rebecca. John, I've reviewed the documents you sent over, she said without preamble. The timing of her relationship with Morrison, the transfer of assets during your separation, if what you're showing me is accurate, we have a solid case for fraud. And the other matter? The foundation paperwork is clean. As far as anyone can tell, the Paradise Valley Children's Fund is a legitimate charity with a 2-year history. Nobody will question its sudden prominence in local social circles. I smiled. Perfect. Send everything to Jack. He'll handle the next phase. After hanging up, I walked to the window of my penthouse office. The city sprawled below, a maze of opportunities and secrets. Somewhere out there, Alice was probably planning her future with Morrison, dreaming of the perfect life she thought she'd found. She had no idea she was about to become the star of a very different story. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and preparations. By evening, I was back in my home office, reviewing the final details of our plan when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. Hello. John. Alice's voice, slightly breathless, uncertain. I saw you today. In the financial district. I kept my voice neutral, professional. Hello, Alice. Yes, I had meetings downtown. You look different. I almost didn't recognize you. 3 years is a long time. A pause. I could hear her breathing, could almost see her gathering her courage. John, I think we should talk. About everything. About James. My hand tightened on the phone. Now you want to talk. Please, she said softly. Things are complicated. There's so much you don't understand. I thought about the documents on my desk. About the trail of lies and betrayal we'd uncovered. About the little boy who shared Morrison's last name. You're right, I said finally. Things are complicated. But don't worry, Alice. Everything will become very clear very soon. I ended the call before she could respond and immediately dialed Jack. Move up the timeline, I said without preamble. She's getting nervous. We need to strike while she's off balance. The gala invitations go out tomorrow, Jack confirmed. But John, are you sure you want to go through with the whole plan? Once we start this. She made her choice 3 years ago, I cut him off. Now it's time for her to face the consequences. After hanging up, I walked to my safe and pulled out one final document, a DNA test ID had done 6 months ago, when I first suspected the truth about James. I hadn't opened it yet. Part of me didn't want to know. But as I stood there, holding the sealed envelope, I realized it didn't matter anymore. Whether James was my son or Morrison's, whether Alice's betrayal began before she left or after, none of it changed what needed to be done. I put the envelope back in the safe without opening it. Some truths could wait. For now, I had a charity gala to plan. And a life to destroy. The next 2 weeks passed in a carefully choreographed dance of preparation. The Henderson mansion was transformed into a showcase of wealth and taste. The guest list was cultivated with surgical precision. Every detail was arranged to create the perfect stage for what was to come. And through it all, I watched. Watched as Alice drove past the mansion each day, curiosity evident in the way she slowed down to study the activity. Watched as Morrison's security team vetted the charity and its sudden appearance in their social circle. Watched as my plan began to take shape. The night before the gala, I stood in my new temporary home, looking out over the lights of Paradise Valley. Somewhere out there, Alice was probably trying on her dress, practicing her smile for tomorrow's announcement. Morrison was likely reviewing his speech, confident in his perfect world. And I was ready to show them both exactly what happens when you underestimate the men you leave behind. The night of the gala arrived with picture-perfect precision. Standing in front of the mirror, adjusting my Brioni suit, I hardly recognized myself. 3 years had changed more than just my bank account, they'd changed everything about me. Your guests are starting to arrive, Jack's voice crackled through my earpiece. He was coordinating security, making sure every piece of our plan fell perfectly into place. I descended the grand staircase of my temporary mansion, watching as Paradise Valley's elite filtered in. Each guest had been carefully chosen, each invitation strategically placed. The whispers had already started. Who was this mysterious tech entrepreneur? Where had he come from? How had no one heard of him before? And then I saw her. Alice entered on Morrison's arm, wearing a red dress that caught every eye in the room. She looked confident, radiating the kind of assurance that only money can buy. But I caught the slight tremor in her hand as she accepted a champagne flute from a passing waiter. She'd seen me. Richard Morrison and guest have arrived, Jack confirmed unnecessarily in my ear. Operation is go. I made my way through the crowd, playing the perfect host. When I finally reached them, Morrison's face lit up with recognition. John. He exclaimed, extending his hand. John Porter. I had no idea you were behind this. Your company's breakthrough in quantum encryption has been making waves. I smiled, watching Alice's face pale slightly. Richard, wonderful to see you. And Alice, it's been too long. You live here now. She managed, her composure cracking just slightly. Just moved in, I replied smoothly. The neighborhood came highly recommended. Though I must say, the view from my study is revealing. The double meaning wasn't lost on her. Her grip on Morrison's arm tightened. Ladies and gentlemen, Jack's voice rang out, right on cue. If you'll all proceed to the main hall, tonight's presentation is about to begin. As the crowd moved, I caught Alice's arm. We should catch up later, I said quietly. I believe we have some unfinished business to discuss. About James. She jerked away as if burned, but I saw the fear in her eyes. Good. The presentation began, a carefully crafted story about children in need, about second chances and redemption. All the while, I watched Alice fidget in her seat, watched Morrison beam proudly, completely unaware of the trap closing around him. When it was time for Morrison's big announcement, I gave Jack the signal. The lights dimmed, the projector hummed to life, and instead of Morrison's carefully prepared engagement video, something else entirely began to play. Emails. Bank transfers. Hotel receipts. All meticulously documenting the beginning of their affair, 2 years before Alice left me. Before my company struggled. Before everything fell apart. The room went silent. Morrison stood frozen at the podium. And Alice. Alice looked like she might faint. But that was just the beginning. The scandal broke the next morning. Tech mogul's secret affair exposed screamed the headlines. Morrison's carefully cultivated image as a family man, a philanthropist, began to crumble under the weight of evidence we'd gathered. But the real blow came 3 days later, when his wife, yes, his wife, emerged from the shadows. Did you really think I didn't know? Sharon Morrison's voice was ice cold as she faced the press. Did you think I wouldn't protect myself? The truth was beautiful in its simplicity. Morrison hadn't been playing just Alice, had been playing everyone. Still legally married, had been promising Alice a future he could never deliver. And now, thanks to our careful orchestration, his empire was beginning to crumble. Alice tried to reach me, of course. Dozens of calls, messages, each more desperate than the last. Please, John, she begged when I finally answered. You don't understand. James, he's your son with Morrison. I cut her off. Or should I open that DNA test I had done? The silence on the other end was deafening. Meet me tomorrow, I said finally. Noon. The cafe where you told me you were leaving. Well-discussed terms. I hung up before she could respond, staring out at the city lights. The game wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. But for the first time in 3 years, I felt something close to peace. The next day, I arrived early at the cafe. The DNA test results finally opened and read, burning a hole in my pocket. Alice was already there, looking smaller somehow, less certain in her designer clothes. Before you say anything, I began, sliding into the seat across from her, you should know that Sharon Morrison has been working with us from the beginning. Everything, the gala, the exposure, all of it, was planned. Why? She whispered. If this is about revenge. No, Alice. This is about justice. And about truth. I pulled out the DNA test results. He's mine, isn't he? James is my son. Her tears were answer enough. The game had changed. Now it wasn't just about revenge, it was about something far more important. And as I sat there, watching the mother of my child cry, I realized the hardest part was yet to come. Because sometimes, revenge isn't enough. Sometimes, justice demands more than just destruction. It demands redemption. The cafe seemed to shrink around us as Alice's tears fell. The DNA test results lay between us like a bridge and a barrier all at once. James was my son. My son. The words kept echoing in my head, changing everything and nothing at the same time. Why didn't you tell me? My voice was barely controlled. 3 years, Alice. 3 years of his life I can never get back. She wiped her eyes, her designer mascara leaving dark smudges. I didn't know for sure, at first. And then Morrison promised me everything. Security, stability, a future. He said he'd raise James as his own. While he was still married to Sharon. The bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. You really know how to pick them, don't you? I was scared, John. When I left, your company was failing. We were drowning in debt. And then I found out I was pregnant. She reached for my hand across the table. I pulled back. So you ran to Morrison. To his money. To his lies. I stood up, needing space, needing air. Do you know what happened after you left? Do you know what your betrayal did to me? She shook her head mutely. It broke me. Completely. And then it rebuilt me. I turned to look out the cafe window, at the city that had witnessed my transformation. Every sleepless night, every moment of despair, they became fuel. The project you thought was failing. It evolved into something bigger. Something that caught the attention of the right investors. The quantum encryption breakthrough, she whispered. That was you. That was me. The man you left behind didn't stay behind, Alice. He became someone else. Someone stronger. Someone who could have given you and James everything you wanted. I turned back to face her. But you couldn't wait, could you? John, please. She stood up, reaching for me again. We can fix this. Now that Morrison's true colors are exposed, now that you know about James. Fix this. I pulled out my phone and showed her the latest headlines. Morrison's empire was crumbling. His wife's revelations had triggered investigations into financial irregularities. The man who had stolen my wife was watching his carefully constructed world fall apart. Sharon's lawyers have been very thorough, I continued. Every asset transfer, every hidden account, it's all coming out. Including the ones in your name. Alice's face went pale. What do you mean? The properties Morrison put in your name to hide them from his wife. The offshore accounts. Sharon's legal team is freezing everything. You're about to lose it all, Alice. Everything you thought you'd gained. She sank back into her chair, the reality of her situation finally hitting home. What am I supposed to do? I looked at her for a long moment, remembering the woman I'd loved, seeing the mother of my child, and finally understanding what needed to happen next. Now, I said quietly, we talk about James. The next few weeks passed in a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and carefully orchestrated moves. Morrison's empire continued to crumble, but I made sure Alice and James were protected, not for her sake, but for his. My son deserved better than to be collateral damage in this war of hearts. I met him for the first time on a sunny Saturday morning. He had my eyes, Alice's smile, and a laugh that made 3 years of pain almost worth it. Almost. Daddy? He asked, looking up at me with uncertainty and hope. Alice had been preparing him for this moment, explaining in toddler terms who I really was. Yeah, buddy, I managed, kneeling down to his level. I'm your daddy. He crashed into my arms with the pure, uncomplicated love that only children can give, and something inside me finally began to heal. The revenge I'd planned, the destruction I'd orchestrated, it all seemed hollow now in the face of this small miracle. But that didn't mean Morrison would escape unscathed. The investigators found everything, Jack told me later that week. The fraud, the embezzlement, the hidden accounts. He's facing serious charges. And Sharon? She'll get everything in the divorce. Her lawyers made sure of that. Jack paused. What about Alice? I looked out my office window, thinking about the arrangements we'd made. A modest but comfortable house in my name, a trust fund for James, and a second chance I never thought I'd give. She's James' mother, I said finally. That has to count for something. The next few months brought changes I never expected. Shared custody arrangements. Family therapy sessions. Awkward but necessary conversations about the past and the future. Alice's transformation from trophy girlfriend back to the woman I'd once known was slow but steady. Morrison pled guilty to multiple charges of fraud and financial misconduct. His fall from grace was complete, his reputation in tatters. But watching him being led away in handcuffs brought me no joy. I had something better now, something real. 1 year later, I stood in my backyard, watching James play on the swing set I'd built for him. Alice sat nearby, no longer dripping with designer labels, looking more like herself than she had in years. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. The revenge, the exposure, all of it. I thought about the path that had led us here. About the pain and betrayal that had forged me into someone stronger. About the son I'd gained and the peace I'd finally found. No, I said honestly. We all needed the truth. Even if it hurt. Even if it cost us everything we thought we wanted. She nodded, understanding finally settling between us like a gentle rain. We weren't the same people who had hurt each other so deeply. We weren't in love anymore, but we were something else, something more mature, more real. Co-parents. Friends, maybe, someday. Daddy, watch this. James called out, swinging higher and higher, his laughter carrying across the yard. I smiled, watching my son touch the sky. The revenge I'd planned had given way to something far more powerful, redemption. Not just for Alice, but for me too. For all of us. Jack came by later that evening, after Alice had taken James home. We sat on my deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors of forgiveness. You know, he said thoughtfully, this isn't how I thought your revenge story would end. I thought about the DNA test results that had changed everything. About the choices I'd made since then. About the future stretching out before us, complicated and messy and real.